Speaking next is Caroline Russell, who is the sole opposition on Islington Council.
That's right.
Yes, the one green voice among a sea of Labour. Yeah. We'll just wait for her to get her water and we'll get started. Excellent. Thank you very much.
That's a pleasure. Hello, everyone. I am Caroline Russell. I'm a Green Party London Assembly member, and I'm also, as described, the only non-Labour councillor on Islington Council. Now, as a London Assembly member, my job, along with Sian Berry, is to check that the Mayor of London is doing a good job. And I have spent the last 4 years checking that the Mayor of London is doing a good job on transport, environment and economy. And Sian has been focused on housing and policing. So what I'm here to talk about today is what the air pollution and climate emergency crises mean for our transport system. Now, I started out as an artist and I retrained in my early 30s as a civil engineer. And I then had 3 children and a period of being full-time parent and got into masses and masses of local campaigning, which is when the Green Party asked me to join them to stand for the local council in 2010. So I joined the Green Party on the 31st of August, 2009, and I've never looked back. And I joined mainly because the Green Party has excellent transport policies, has policies that take on board the problems of people being killed on the road, the pollution and the sort of ludicrous use of far too much energy to move ourselves around. But I think the biggest reason that I had got into transport campaigning before I joined the Green Party was to stop people getting killed on the road. There's a child, Zara Adams, who would now be 23. And when she was 4 years old, on the way to school, her buggy got caught under the wheels of a heavy goods vehicle, and she was killed. And that just drew me up short. She was the same age as my middle daughter. And I just thought, this is just so shocking that a child walking to school, crossing the road, the fact that we have a system that is so unsafe that she was killed as a lorry turned. You know, those kind of mistakes have been designed out on the railway system, but they are happening all the time on our roads. So for the UK, in the year leading up to June 2018, 26,610 people in the UK, I'll say that again, 26,610 people were killed or seriously injured on roads in the UK. Now, a serious injury means something that is life-changing. It's like losing a leg or losing an arm or having an injury, a head injury, that means that you can't continue to work in the way that you used to work before the crash that injured you. So this is an extraordinary toll of people whose lives are being absolutely shattered by collisions on our roads. And they're called very often in the newspapers, they're called accidents. And they're absolutely not accidents. They are systemic problems. They are systemic issues, and we really, as a society, ought to be able to sort it out. Now, I'm just going to do one thing. I'm going to get my phone, because I don't have a watch on today, and I need to keep track of the time that I'm taking, because it would never do to speak for too long. Okay, very good. So we have this situation where far too many people are being killed and very seriously injured on our roads. We have an incredibly car-dependent system everywhere. So planning, they build new homes without any public transport. It should be, in a climate emergency, it should be completely impossible to build a single new home without access to public transport. You put the public transport in before you build the homes, so the workers who are building the homes can get to work to build them. You certainly don't build homes where people are trapped in forced car use and forced car ownership. Because if you are living on a very low income and you're living somewhere where the public transport is scarce or non-existent, that means that you have no access to education or to work or even possibly to healthcare. So we've got a very car-dependent planning and general sort of system. We also have an explosion in technical changes. So we have internet deliveries. How many people here have ever ordered anything from Amazon? Go on, admit it. So, apart from the fact that the workers in the Amazon factories are being on 0 hours contracts and all of those bad things about Amazon, the other bad thing about Amazon is that it is causing a huge, huge uptick in the amount of vehicles on the roads, not just in towns and cities, but also in rural areas. Someone was telling me they live in Devon, and they were saying that, you know, the number of delivery vans on the lane past their house was just growing all the time because of Amazon deliveries. And the other big change is sat-nav, because in towns and cities, anybody can make their way through the back streets to get anywhere they want to go. They don't have to just use the main road system. So it means in areas of London, we have a situation where people driving through have effectively got access to the knowledge, which is what black cab drivers, you know, spend years of time learning, you know, how to cut through the back streets to make your journey faster and to avoid all the extra congestion that's being caused by all the extra Amazon deliveries. Now that is making a big, big difference to streets where people are living and where children are walking to school. And there's a kind of massive problem that relates to all this extra traffic, especially cutting through on the residential streets, which is air pollution. Because every single car on the road, whatever fuel it is using, is contributing to bad air. And bad air is damaging all our health. It is related to increases in the amount of asthma, cases of asthma. It is permanently stunting children's lung growth, but it is also adding to cardiovascular problems and contributing to cancer. So it is really, you know, what we are breathing in every single road is pretty bad. And it's not just diesel. It's also the PM 2.5 particles. Now, someone in the circular economy thing talked about tyres as single-use items. Car tyres release tiny, tiny particles, so small you can't see them, and these are the PM 2.5 particle pollution. It also comes from road abrasion, and these particles are so small you can't see them. When you breathe them in, they get straight into your bloodstream. So that is why they are so dangerous, because those are the ones that are causing cancer and other problems for people's health. So even if you have a lovely, squeaky clean electric vehicle, you are still contributing to air pollution with the tyre wear and road abrasion every time you use your car. Now, if you were starting from scratch, would you ever design a system of transport that involved people sitting in an armchair, carrying an extra armchair and a sofa out the back to travel very often just 1 or 2 miles down the road to pick up a pint of milk or buy a newspaper? It's absolutely ludicrous that we use so much energy, and that was something else that came up in the circular economy talk earlier, that we're wasting energy moving all this stuff along roads just because the roads are too dangerous, people don't feel comfortable cycling, they don't even feel very comfortable walking, and the buses in many places are completely non-existent. But actually, we could change all of this, and we could make our towns and cities into less dangerous, less traffic-dominated places where it is safe and pleasant and easy to get around under our own steam on foot or by bike, or to get around on public transport. So, what else do I need to get to? Yes. So, 2018, and we had the IPCC report, which told us all, basically, we've got till 2030 to make a proper difference and reduce our carbon emissions. So we have a real incentive to try and change the way we get around. Now, the motor manufacturers, because they really do not have a kind of stuff turnover reduction target, the motor manufacturers are very, very keen on everyone continuing to drive around with an armchair, a spare armchair, and a sofa out the back. And they would like us to do this in electrically powered vehicles instead of doing it in diesel or petrol, fossil-fueled vehicles. But actually, we have to make sure that the move to cut carbon emissions and the move to clean up our air results in many, many fewer cars on the road. So we don't have that congestion in the first place. Because the congestion, the road danger, and the air pollution still exist whatever fuel your car is powered by. And so this could be a massive, massive, massive opportunity. Another problem with all these cars and all this car dependency is parking. Now, I don't know what parking is like around here in Southend, but certainly everywhere in inner London now has controlled parking zones everywhere, because people used to drive in from out of London, park by our tube stations, and then take a tube to get into central London to go to work. And that meant that anyone living locally couldn't park a car. But if you pause and think about it, it's really quite extraordinary that we allow that much public space to be taken up by storing cars. Most of these containers for the 2 armchairs and the sofa on wheels are, most of them are parked 95% of the time. So in terms of use of resources, it is the biggest scam going. The car manufacturers have persuaded everyone that they need their own pair of armchairs and a sofa on wheels rather than sharing with other people, using a car club for the occasions when they actually need a car. And this is not only adding to congestion, but it is also making our streets into much, much less pleasant places. So there are people, there's some stuff I'm just about to come on to, which is all about hope and good things. But I just want you to think for a moment about the space that is used for parking where you live and what it would be like if half those car parking spaces went and they were turned into little pocket parks. Just put that in your heads for a moment. Now, need to wind up if you're going to have time to ask me any questions. So, the bit about hope. In Waltham Forest in East London, one of the good things, I think one of the only good things that Boris Johnson did when he was Mayor of London was he gave Waltham Forest Council £30 million to completely transform their borough and make it into a place that was decent and safe and convenient and pleasurable to walk and cycle. And what they've done is they've taken networks of local roads bounded by main roads, and they've made it so that you cannot cut through from one main road to another. You can access every single home in those networks of streets, but you cannot use the residential networks of streets to rat run from one main road to another to shave 5 minutes off your journey time. Now you can imagine, when they first started this whole program, and they just put bollards in the road or a planter, it's quite cheap and cheerful, but when they first started doing it, some people were in uproar. A lot of businesses were really grumpy about it because they thought, they somehow imagined that all their customers came by car. In fact, Living Streets have a brilliant report called the Pedestrian Pound, which proves that if you make a decent pedestrian and cycling environment, you actually get more footfall and more shoppers, and you end up with a nicer high street where people actually want to dwell and spend time. So that's the Pedestrian Pound, and they updated it just this last year, so it's totally up to date and really, really useful. So they had, a lot of people were in uproar. They were saying, oh, we're trapped in our homes. We're never going to be able to go anywhere. This is just terrible. But once they did it, people were amazed. Local little parades of shops that were kind of dying a death of slow miserableness suddenly started thriving and selling useful things like vegetables and things that breakfast cereal and, flour, eggs, stuff you need to just make your daily purchases. And people talked about being able to hear birdsong. And people talked about their kids being able to walk to school, and people talking to their neighbours much more. So, but it's not only that the area became a nicer place, less traffic dominated, but actually people had children growing up in Waltham Forest have an extra X months of healthy life ahead of them already, just by having been living in Waltham Forest since this all came in about 2017, 2018. Can you guess how many extra months of healthy life those children growing up in Waltham Forest have compared to children growing up in Hackney or Islington or other London boroughs? Anyone? 7. But an extra 7 months of healthy life is a real, and that they've got those, that's proper validated data. It's a woman called Rachel Aldred, Dr. Rachel Aldred, who did the study that shows it. So they've got real evidence that shows that those children growing up in Waltham Forest are more physically active and are taking more exercise and have healthier lives. They're breathing cleaner air than children growing up in neighbouring boroughs. Now, the other thing that has been going on alongside the Mini Holland stuff is creating parklets. There's a woman called Brenda Pesh in Hackney who turned a parking space outside her house into a little park. She put up an umbrella, a bench, some fake grass, some plant pots, and she had a visitor's book, and she told people to write messages to her. So people came along and they said, like, they'd had their first date there and things like that. But it's a way of just making people think about how the street could be used in a different way. The other thing that's really taking off at the moment are play streets and school streets. So play streets are where a community uses street party legislation to close their road, and it means it's not only about children playing, it's about people of all generations coming out, having a cup of tea, having a chat, and people, it just makes a massive, massive difference to the social cohesion of the street. There was one that happened in my ward in Highbury just a few weeks ago, and there were 2 women from Colombia. They lived in, there's a a couple of blocks of flats halfway down the street, and they each lived on the other side of the road. They'd both lived in the road for over 15 years, and they'd never met each other until they had a play street. And it's those kind of connections that make for a much more resilient community and connected community. And there was one more thing I was going to talk about, school streets. So how do we make our streets at school drop-off and pick-up time into less frantic places? So school streets are where you just close the street by a school to traffic so that nobody can drive to the school. And you suddenly end up with everyone, their shoulders go down, deep breath, relax, no more argy-bargy, everyone trying to double park and drop their children off. It is extraordinary. The people whose children attend schools where they have a school street just say it has transformed the beginning and the end of the day. So these are just tiny things that can be done that can actually show people how different our streets can be and how much better and more people-friendly and less hostile they can be. So I think I'm going to leave it there. And if anyone wants to ask me any questions, they can. So I'm slightly being blinded by lights here, but does anyone have any questions? Okay, are there one here in the middle?
Can I ask about the school streets? Is it under legislation or is it just agreement with the local authority?
School streets?
Yes.
They are. It's done by the local authority, and I think again it's using the street party legislation to be able to do it. But actually, no. In Islington, they've done traffic orders for them, so it's a timed thing, and they're controlling it with cameras.
Okay, so it's not closing it forever. It's just in school hours.
It's
or school drop-off and pick-up time.
It's school drop-off and pick-up time, yeah.
Okay,
And it's about giving people a real signal that it is much less convenient to drive to school, and that during school drop-off and pick-up times we prioritise the safety and clean air for our children.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Near where we are now, on the A127, and it's about 100 yards from school, the air pollution levels is the 8th worst in the whole of Britain. So what they're doing is they're making a traffic flow system. So anybody that drives around by the bell on the A127, they're doing traffic works. But what that's doing is just moving the problem further along. And then there's going to be a pollution problem somewhere else. Now, there's only 2 or 3 places in the whole of this town that's monitored. So the only way you can make this thing less popular is to have more monitoring stations. How can we get the council to sort of monitor the air quality more uniformly over the town?
Several ways. I mean, the council should be monitoring the air pollution. You can get hold of nitrogen dioxide diffusion tubes for measuring the nitrogen dioxide levels, and that serves as a proxy for PM 2.5 levels. And certainly in Islington, about 10 years ago, we were doing a lot of campaigning, measuring the air, doing citizen science, and that helped to raise awareness. But actually, the science is now so accepted that we know that any road that has heavy traffic on it is very polluted and is bad for our health. So every local authority should be doing everything possible they can do to reduce traffic. And that means making it less convenient to drive, and so making sure that it is safe for people who choose to get on a bike. And with electric assist bikes now, there is no excuse for not cycling for a sort of 7 or 8 mile journey, you know, and many local journeys that people make in their cars are under 7 or 8 miles. But these electric assist bikes, which are relative, you know, compared to a car, amazingly affordable, are kind of completely game-changing in terms of people thinking when their current car comes to an end, that rather than replacing it with an electric vehicle, they will actually have no vehicle, use a car share for journeys which absolutely need a car, and then do everything else on foot and by bike. But local authorities should be making sure that they are, on public health grounds, should be making sure that they are reducing traffic in their borough. And certainly, again, for the London Assembly elections, our manifesto is going to have a very strong traffic miles reduction target.
Just wanted to pick up there. You mentioned the air quality monitoring kits. At one point, Friends of the Earth were actually giving those out. They've stopped doing that now, and I've had some trouble getting them. So if you know of any suppliers, then let me know afterwards.
Yeah, it's Gradco, who were providing them, just got completely overwhelmed by people ordering, you know, small numbers of them, like 6 at a time, and so they stopped offering the service. But I think the best thing would be to be pushing your local authority, particularly to monitor. I mean, one of the ways of doing it is to get them to monitor by schools, on roads by schools, because it's an emotive thing. It kind of, you know, people want to know that children are breathing clean air. And I think the other thing is making sure that people are aware that when you're inside a car, you are more exposed to air pollution than if you are walking and cycling in the street outside. So all those people putting their children into cars to drive them to school, to keep them safe from the traffic danger, are actually exposing them to worse air pollution than if they were walking their children to school. So it is, you know, the need to drive less to protect your own health is very, very powerful. And we should be using that to push our local authorities to make it easier for people to drive less.
Hello there. So obviously in London you have they're known as the Boris bikes. I think they're called the Santander bikes now, aren't they? We in Southend have recently, within the last couple of years, got some bright yellow equivalents in Southend. And I personally have never seen a single person riding any one of those bikes. What is your opinion on those kind of community bike initiatives that, you know, you pay a certain amount to borrow said bikes? Because obviously Southend is a very tourist-heavy town, especially in the summer. And from a Green Party perspective, we'd always try and push people to make the greenest possible transit across the town. Do you think that these kind of bike schemes are worth it?
Okay, dockless bikes. Are yours Offo bikes? No, so your yellow ones, who are okay, they've taken away, yeah. So, dockless bikes, in principle, it's a good idea. It's using technology. Everyone's got a phone. You can, you know, and can have access to a bike wherever you are. But the problem is that they get dumped irresponsibly. They cause problems for people who are blind or partially sighted because they'll be dumped right across the path of a footway, so where people actually fall over them. So they have been causing lots and lots of problems. I think there is a way that they could be made to work with good regulation, but you need geofencing to make sure that they're left in sensible places. So in Hackney, they're trialling making car parking spaces on the road available for dockless bike parking. And if every road has 2 or 3 dockless bike parking spaces, then that gives you the kind of the convenience of being able to do a door-to-door journey on a dockless bike, but also means that they're kept off the footway and they're not being a nuisance. But the other problem is that they have been produced, if we're talking about the circular economy again, they've been produced mainly by venture capitalists in China and wherever, and they just see them as expendable, as throwaway. They're not particularly good quality. Those yellow ones in particular were very poor quality and were not a pleasure to ride. They've changed them in London now. We've got jump bikes, which are the Uber bikes, which are electric, and they seem to be an awful lot of fun to ride. I haven't ridden one, but I've seen people having a lot of fun on them. And there's Lime bikes, which are also, and then there's another one, they look a bit sort of steampunk, and I can't remember what the name of them is, but there's 3 different kinds of electric dockless bikes, where we're still tangling with the problem of them being dumped irresponsibly, but basically, because they've got a little bit of fairy juice, they're kind of, they seem to be really making a difference in terms of people choosing to use them instead of catching a bus, which means there's more space on the bus for people who need a bus.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up question. With regards to cycle parking as part of street furniture in and around the town. So as a cyclist, I know that I unfortunately in Southend have lost 3 cycles over the couple of years that I've been here. Bike theft is obviously a big problem everywhere, and I think a lot of people would be encouraged to cycle if there were more available access to street furniture to lock up bikes. One of the biggest problems that I have in Southend is that there's not actually a great deal of cycle parking. In your experience, how is it that you would campaign for better street parking for bikes?
Well, I think you base it on the air pollution, public health grounds, and public health in terms of physical inactivity, that you want your local authority to be taking a responsible attitude to local transport and making sure that it is easy for people to cycle. So that means they need to be providing, do you have any bike hangers in Southend? Those are the things that look like bread bins, and they're put into car parking spaces, and each one takes up half a car parking space, and it parks 6 bikes securely inside, and you pay for a space inside it, sort of round about £1 a week.
We don't have any of those. I mean, some of the stations in and around town do have some quite good cycle storage, but it's really lax in, especially the town centre.
But then you've got things like Cycle Hoop do things that attach to lamp columns, which give you a kind of you've got some of those, yeah. And then just basic Sheffield stands, you know, the things that go up and down. They should be put in all over the place, near shops. I mean, there should be no shops without any cycle parking. But I think it's, you know, that's the kind of thing that if you're campaigning on public health grounds and fairness and equity grounds around public health on reducing traffic, which will make the whole place into a nicer place to live and trade and do, you know, work and whatever. You know, making sure that it is convenient to lock up a bike is absolutely, you know, first base in terms of a local authority sort of taking its public health duty seriously. So, yeah, I'd have thought it should be possible to make some noise around air pollution that actually results in getting more cycle parking all over the town centre.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'm a councillor in Islington Council, and there's some really interesting stuff there. Because we've got lots of really nice cycle routes, but we don't really, well, some anyway, but it's making the behaviour change to get people to cycle. Is there any interesting stuff you're doing around that to encourage people off their cars into...
The best way to get people out of their cars and onto a bike or walking is to make sure that your roads are safe and feel like places where you would tell your neighbour's 8-year-old to cycle. So if you're a councillor, you should always be feeling, if you're making any kind of change to the road, would I feel okay recommending to my neighbour that their 8-year-old child travel to school alone on this route. And that is the standard that we should be going for. Because if they're okay for our neighbour's 8-year-old to cycle to school or walk to school, the safe crossings, you know, they're going to be safe, then it's going to be safe for older people, it's going to be safe for disabled people, you're going to have inclusive streets. But we have to completely rethink the kind of that basic thing where people just assume that roads are for cars. Our roads should be for people, and that's the kind of mental shift that needs to happen.
Yeah, thank you.
Are you running away? Sorry. That's okay. I was just going to say that in Norwich it seems as if the car drivers have decided that the pavements are for cars and the grass verges are for cars, and that it's not just that the roads are for cars, but actually that the parked cars must be off the roads in order that the roads can be for moving cars, and the pavements or the grass verges, which are now completely sort of patches of mud, are for cars. And I think London has managed to stop that, and it's illegal to park on the pavement. For some reason, it's not happening elsewhere.
Yes, Living Streets have a big campaign about trying to make sure that pavement parking is completely illegal everywhere, and definitely worth supporting Living Streets on that. But I also think that that's another good example of why we have to fundamentally change the way we use our streets. We have to do things like they've done in Mini Holland. We have to block off the rat run routes so that we've got to make it less convenient to use a car in a town or city. It's just, we've got so many options now with electric bikes, with cargo bikes. There are so many alternatives to using a car, and we should be making sure that using a car is really pretty unusual. Okay, I am off to catch a train back to London.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to take a short break now, and then we're going to hear from Catherine Rowett. So the schedule has changed slightly. She was going to be speaking a bit later on, but we'll bring it forward now. So take a 10-15 minute break, get a drink, order some food if you want, and we'll be back shortly.